The Lowe Post is brought to you by Goodyear, helping you discover the road ahead. Goodyear, more driven.
How does 25-year-old two-time MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo get drafted 15th overall in a weak draft class? Our own Adrian Wojnarowski investigates the twists and turns that led to a franchise and league-altering selection way back in 2013. A three-part series that tells this unique story, including interviews with individuals close to the process, as well as a one-on-one sit-down with Giannis himself. Check out the Woj Pod special, The Giannis Draft, wherever you find your podcasts.
And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast early on a Monday morning as the NBA is about at the end of maybe its most frenzied 7-day period in league history, starting with trades, then draft, then free agency, all right in a row. Let's never do this again. I have not slept very much in 8 days, but it was fun. It was crazy. And there are a couple of dominoes still to fall, Bogdanovich here and there. But barring a trade, we are about done. Let's lord over the landscape, see what it looks like, and evaluate it with 538's Chris Herring. How are you doing, sir?
Doing okay, Zach. How are you?
I'm good. It has been an absolutely bonkers week, but we're about through it. And how are you feeling about the NBA? Do you feel that it's different? Do you feel that we're about the same place we left it? How are you feeling?
I mean, did we even really leave it? I know you and I have talked about this a little bit. We didn't really put it down for very long, but I know that's just the state of things right now. But every time I kind of feel like it's not, nothing's going to happen. It's a kind of low level free agency season, and then you start things off by Chris Paul getting traded, the James Harden rumors, and it's like, okay, here we go. And so then I think for junkies like you and me, the idea that Fred VanVleet is the headliner or one of the headliners for free agency shows you that it kind of doesn't matter, that it's hot stove season for us. And it was a fun week, really, when you think about it. And, kind of excited to talk about these teams and which ones we thought did well and, a couple that we kind of scratched our heads a little bit.
See, so even if Fred VanVleet is the headliner, and no offense to Fred VanVleet, is a very fine player, that's a below average free agency headliner. To your point, even if that's the case, there's always going to be a James Harden. There's always going to be a Chris Paul. And the best teams draw so much public interest because even a little marginal move, like say signing Marc Gasol to a 2-year minimum contract, can be a gigantic deal in the pursuit of a championship. So even if it's just quote unquote Fred VanVleet, it's still going to be exciting. And I think that's the place to start because, I think Rob Pelinka and the Lakers and Clutch Sports absolutely demolished the offseason. Let's review what they did. Out went Dwight Howard. Well, for a second, Dwight Howard came back, and then he was so officially Dwight Howard. I wanted him to do it again. I wanted him to make a running bit, tweet that he was signing with the Sixers, delete the tweet, and do it like 4 more times until he finally landed on a team. Anyway, out went Dwight Howard, out went Avery Bradley, out went Danny Green, out went JaVale McGee. In came Dennis Schroeder, Montrezl Harrell in what was the first sort of free agency, like, ooh, plot twist, walking across the hallway at Staples. In came Wesley Matthews, and in came, in a poetic instance of life coming full circle for both Marc Gasol and the Gasol family, in came Marc Gasol. I think that is a very clear upgrade for the Lakers, and I think the Gasol signing was a huge, huge key to it because the Harrell Davis LeBron fit I actually don't love. I like the Gasol Davis fit a lot. I think Gasol and Harrell can even play together. I think the Lakers, unless Marc Gasol's playoff performance is indicative of where he is as a player now, and I don't think it is. I think we're actually overrating how bad he looked in the bubble. I think he shot 18% from 3, struggled to finish in the pick and roll at the rim against Boston, just looked old. I think we're overrating that and forgetting that he shot 39% from 3 in the regular season. Yeah, he was a little tentative. That's fine. Against the Lakers, he can pick and pop and throw his little Marc Gasol bowling ball passes around. It would be great. And so I think that was a big signing. And so you look at that, that's a net upgrade for reasons we can talk about. And I think getting Wes Matthews and Schroeder, if you look at their ability to play AD at center, the perimeter foursome they have now of Schroeder, Caruso, KCP, bringing him back was huge, and Wes Matthews is about equivalent to the foursome they had in the bubble of Caruso, Rondo, Danny Green, and KCP. And obviously Avery Bradley's gone, but I think Taylor Horton Tucker will have a role. So I absolutely loved what the Lakers did. What are your takeaways, Chris?
Sometimes you and I almost hate it just because I think you and I are kind of in lockstep with certain things. But yeah, I looked at it and I even tweeted at one point over the weekend, man, as much as I think most teams would love to have Montrezl Harrell, I don't know that if this is all they're going to get, if I would rather have him at the money that they're going to get him for, as opposed to just having Dwight in the same role as last year. And then you add Marc Gasol, and it changes the context of that conversation, because like you were saying before, you can play Gasol and Harrell together if you really want to. You obviously can play AD and Harrell together if you really want to. But the idea that Harrell's weaknesses are kind of masked, are going to be helped or aided by whoever you've got there in the 5 role, who's going to be a better defender, you feel a lot better about that. I don't see any way to not like the idea of the Wes Matthews signing. The fact that they kept KCP, I think, was massive, given the offseason he just had.
Huge.
So I mean, it's really hard. I know you and I talked via email just kind of about what this exercise would look like for us. It's hard. These are the defending champs. It's really hard to say that the Lakers didn't win free agency.
I would, if I were them, I mean, it's very early, I would start Gasol and bring Harrell off the bench, because I like the idea of Harrell playing with Schroeder as the 1-2 finishers from Sixth Man of the Year last year playing together. Harrell obviously needs an elite pick and roll partner to fuel him, and he will have that with both LeBron and Schroeder. I mean, Schroeder's not elite, but if you give him a good role man like Harrell, he'll be fine. And if you look at Harrell's splits with the Clippers, he shot like massively better when he was on the floor with Lou Williams versus without Lou Williams. So he needs a little help, and he'll get it there. The Harrell-Davis combo is fine. One of the reasons I didn't like it is that it doesn't space the floor for Davis to be a dive man. So Davis has to be the spacer, which he was with Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee. But one of the things that Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee brought was like a vertical game that Harrell doesn't really have. Offensive rebounding, tip backs. Harrell's an okay offensive rebounder. Those guys are giant people who are elite offensive rebounders. Harrell's like 6'8", and he's not a huge leaper. And so you would have lost that dimension. Now, Gasol doesn't really have that kind of dimension on offense anymore, but the trade-off is he will shoot threes and space the floor for Davis to dive to the rim. Another thing I like about it, and this would apply to Harrell too, is I think it's important for the Lakers to have a center, or whatever you want to call Harrell if he plays with Davis, who, when the other team decides they have to play their centers against Davis because AD's post-up game is too big for their power forwards, to have a center who can then exploit the opposing power forward, because that opposing power forward has to go somewhere, and you'd see teams stick them on JaVale McGee or Dwight, and like those guys aren't post-up threats anymore. They're offensive rebounding threats. Marc Gasol, he's getting a little long in the tooth. You give him the ball against a 6'8" wing masquerading as a power forward, he can do damage. Montrezl Harrell can do damage. I love the fit of and defensively, again, the Lakers bet on size, right? That was their big bet last year. We want a center. We're cool with AD playing away from the rim because he's so big, he can fly around the floor and be everywhere all at once. And we like to have two giant guys at the rim. Well, Marc Gasol brings that for you defensively. You know, you and I think I don't know which podcast we did, but when I did my all defense picks, I asked a bunch of coaches around the league, if I have to pick one guy from the Raptors to make one of my all defensive teams, all 5 of their starters are candidates. Who should I pick? And by a plurality, not a majority, but by a plurality, the choice was Marc Gasol is still the best defensive player in the Raptors starting lineup. I'm not sure I agreed with that, but those coaches are smarter than I am about basketball. So I was like, well, they must be picking up on a little something that I'm not seeing. So, and then when you factor in that their perimeter depth is more or less the same as it was last year, and we can talk about Schroeder a little bit. I think Schroeder's a great fit. I think the Lakers walk into next season as the championship favorites.
And, I mean, the other thing we haven't even mentioned, too, we were all looking forward to kind of the return of Golden State. You know, you look at, obviously, what happened with Klay, unfortunately. You take into account that love the move or hate it, and like I said, I think we both kind of are more toward the love it spectrum now, given that, they bolstered some of the questions we had about Harrell. You took a pretty key piece away from the Clippers, which some people would kind of disagree with that, depending on how you feel about Harrell. But he obviously was an important part of that team, and they lose JaMychal Green. They did replace him with Serge Ibaka, but you're weakening one of the teams that you feel like you're going to be up against for that Western Conference spot in the finals. So there's that. Houston is doing whatever Houston is doing this offseason. And so, I mean, this is just a massive offseason for the Lakers when you consider the fact that they've given themselves so much margin for error here to repeat, not only as the Western Conference favorite, but, as a champion.
I think the Clippers, they lost Harrell and Green. And for a hot second, you sat there thinking, are they going to do anything? Like, are the Clippers
Right.
They have like 10 dudes on their team. One of them is Joakim Noah, who's not guaranteed. Like, are they participating? And then they swoop in and get Ibaka, who I think is a fantastic fit for them and almost replaces Green and Harrell in one player.
Right.
You can play a little bit with Zubats. I don't expect that we'll see a ton of that lineup, but it's doable. And it gives them an ingredient as a stretch five with shot blocking skills that they did not have last year. JaMychal Green is a stretch five to some degree, but he's not a rim protector. Then they would go to Marcus Morris at 5, which is a lineup that they just kind of dabbled in here and there and was not as good in the end in a small sample as I think people as certainly I expected it to be. I think Ibaka is a fantastic fit for them. Toronto will miss him a lot. We can talk about that. I thought they rebounded well. We can talk about the rest of the Western Conference later, but I just thought the LA teams, and I don't know what form it will take. Maybe it's going to be a trade in the middle of the season. Maybe it'll be some kind of trade before the season. Obviously, there are minimum slots here and there. I don't think the Clippers are done. I don't think this is the Clippers team. At the very least, I don't think this is the Clippers team that is going to be on the floor after the trade deadline in the season. I don't think they're done remaking their team. They're being patient. I thought the Ibaka signing was great. And I just think home run for the Lakers. Do you like the Schroeder fit for them? A lot of people, Schroeder's kind of a polarizing player among both people in the league and media.
I guess I feel like with the guys he's going to be with and the idea that you're not going to rely on him to have the ball in his hands all the time, which obviously that's kind of what we saw last year with Oklahoma City. I like it better than I would if it was just a standalone signing for another team. I also, the one concern I have is that you bring him in. He had the big shiny 3-point shooting number last year. You don't know whether that's going to hold up. It was more of an aberration, but you're more likely to kind of trust something like that with the team that he's going to have. And at a bare minimum, he's a guy that's going to be more aggressive about getting to the basket than Rondo was, gets to the line more than Rondo does. It's just really hard, even if you want to pick apart kind of one of these signings here and there with the Lakers. In totality, I think you have to like it just on the whole.
I love the Schroeder trade for them. I understand Danny Green was an important part of their team. They gave up a draft pick. I just think teams at this stature, capped out, aging superstar, and then, of course, one who's in his prime, capped out in perpetuity if those guys stay. You just don't get chances to acquire 27-year-old players who were a borderline 6-man of the year last year. You just don't get chances to do it. And we mentioned all those different perimeter players. Schroeder is by far among them, both the group from last year and the group from this year, really the only one who is consistently capable of creating his own shot. And that is a huge, huge deal in the playoffs. It's a huge deal as LeBron gets older. It's a huge deal, frankly. I thought Pelton nailed this in his analysis of both Schroeder and Harrell. I think the Lakers consciously planned for a sped up season with very little offseason, planned for LeBron especially, and maybe AD a little bit, to take some games off and not do as much heavy lifting in the regular season as they had in the past. And I think that was really smart. And Schroeder and Harrell will have nights where they just get you buckets. Like, yeah, I'll get you 25 tonight, 25 and 12 for Harrell tonight. A Schroeder-LeBron pick and roll is going to be a weapon in a way that a Rondo-LeBron pick and roll couldn't quite be. The Caruso-LeBron pick and roll is apparently like Stockton Malone 2.0 or something like Nash Stoudemire. It's like unstoppable. So I don't want to compare it to that. I just love what the Lakers did.
Shell knows that between every tee up, layup, and batter up that you can't wait to catch up with your favorite podcast. So come to Shell and get 3 things done at once. First, fill up with Shell V-Power Nitro Plus to help keep your engine running like new. Then save up with the Fuel Rewards program and never pay full price for gas again. And finally, snack up. I really do like snacks with in-store rewards to save even more time at the pump. Okay, time to wrap it up. Make the most of the stop you need to make with Shell in engines that continues to use Shell V-Power Nitro Plus Premium Gasoline. See full terms and conditions at fuelrewards.com.
Well. The fellow 17-time NBA champion Boston Celtics took a hit. They took a hit, and laptops and mobile devices everywhere nearly exploded when news of Gordon Hayward's 4-year, $120 million deal with the Charlotte Hornets, your and my Charlotte Hornets, came across the Twitter sphere. For Boston, it's a really fascinating decision because they lost a core player for nothing. And by the way, you wanna laugh at the contract? Okay, fine. You want to say Gordon Hayward's injured all the time? Fine. It's indisputably been true for 2 of the last 3 seasons. We are not far removed from a Miami Heat conference final series, Miami-Boston, where Gordon Hayward's health status was like minute-by-minute update level important to Celtics fans. Like all of a sudden, with the zone defense that was flummoxing them, with Kemba Walker looking unable to do anything in the pick and roll against that zone, and with a knee that was banged up, all of a sudden, Gordon Hayward, Mr. Overshadowed, Mr. Fourth Option, Mr. Woulda, Coulda, Shoulda, despite the injuries, was essential. Felt essential. And now he's gone, and they can't really replace him. That's not exactly true because cap flexibility replaced him, and the cap flexibility became Tristan Thompson on a deal we can talk about 2 years, $19 million. The 2021 Celtics are worse. They're worse without Gordon Hayward. Long term, we'll see. Because I don't think they could have had Gordon Hayward at a big number, Kemba at a big number, Tatum and Brown at a big number. It was not going to be palatable to them. But next season, and they're clearly in their championship contention window based on their playoff performance. Next season, they're worse. They could not execute a sign and trade with Indiana, which I think is actually the most interesting element of all of this. And Charlotte now has to pay Gordon Hayward $30 million a year. That's all-star salary. It's not the only big contract tethered to a player who may not ever make another all-star team. I'm not convinced, by the way, that that's true about Gordon Hayward. We'll see. The Sixers just offloaded one to the Thunder in Al Horford. They have another in Tobias Harris that's even bigger, substantially bigger than the Gordon Hayward contract. Pick either the Hornets' perspective or the Celtics' perspective. What is your analysis of this mega deal?
I'm going to take the Hornets perspective first, and I'm going to piggyback off something that you kind of put into the Twitter sphere at first. The idea that Michael Jordan made a late night phone call to Gordon Hayward to basically say, hey, we need you here, more or less. And if I have that wrong, please let me know. But the idea that, man, I'll be damned if I ever have to make a phone call to convince someone to do something when I'm already paying them $120 million over 4 years. But aside from that, and if my name is Michael Jordan and I have to do that.
Well. Let's be fair. Number one, you're Charlotte, and
yes,
the second best player on your team is Devontae Graham, and maybe this year PJ Washington. You have not won a playoff series since, if I'm not mistaken, 2002. So we're going on 20 years of Charlotte not winning a playoff series. Not exactly the sexiest free agent destination. And
it is not.
You want to clown, 2002. You want to clown the contract. That's fine. Just know that it's not like the Pacers and the Celtics were offering $80 million. They weren't offering 120, but my best intel is something like 105, 108, 102, 110. It's not like the delta was so huge. So continue with the MJ call.
Okay. So I will. I mean, I guess think from my perspective, and I was going off what Mark Stein had said, where he was kind of saying that stuff was looking like the 4-year, $100 million range is what he was hoping for, or what was out there.
Even if that's what it was.
So that's the only thing, is that I just look at it, and I think what this free agent period told me, and Charlotte was not necessarily alone, by the way, because that when you look at some of the things that people kind of flinched and reacted to this offseason, we can talk about Jeremy Grant, for instance, and the idea that people said, wow, $20 million for Jeremy Grant a year. And, that was coming out of the Detroit market. This was coming out of the Charlotte market. And I think everything you just said about Charlotte is completely true. The idea that this is a team that realizes that they have to kind of do more, and that they, in this case, have to overpay for someone that they might not be able to fully convince to come there otherwise. And so that's kind of what this is. I find exactly what you said a moment ago really interesting, the idea that there was no sign and trade that was able to be worked out, because we kept hearing repeatedly Gordon Hayward wants to go back to Indiana. And so the fact that didn't happen, and quite frankly, a situation where if you can make that happen, Indiana becomes a little bit more interesting in the grand scheme of everything. But the fact that it didn't, I look at Charlotte, I don't know how much it moves the needle. Maybe it can get them into the playoffs. They're still kind of a really young team looking at it. You don't know yet what you're going to get out of LaMelo. It's interesting, but it's also one of those things where, man, if 4 years from now, if he's their best player or even second best player by that point, depending on how he ages, depending on whether he stays healthy, it's hoping for a lot. And it's the fact that there's no options or anything in that deal. I get why they did it. I get why they probably feel like they had to do it. But man, it's just like you said. Maybe I'm being too harsh and clowning a little bit, but he was paid as the best player in this class when you really put it that way. And I think we all can say he's not the best player in this class.
Well, okay, so I think the ultimate defensive it for Charlotte. And I don't like the contract. The contract's not. It's not exactly going to be a trade asset. Okay. But like Charlotte was set to have anywhere from like 45 million to 75 million in cap space next summer, when the entire league has cap space, or much of the league will have cap space.
So it does nothing to have that money at that point.
Yeah, well, and
for them at least,
as we have just seen, a Charlotte Hornets team with access to that much cap space is a recipe for like lots of bad stuff happening. So they preemptively were like, let's do something a little maybe less bad than some stuff we might do next summer. I do think, look, there is a premium in the NBA on wings who have wing skills. Okay, 3-point shooting, pick and roll creation, good passing vision. And Gordon's a great passer. Passing, I think, is the best part of his game. Who can legit guard fours. Not masquerade guarding fours, not guard fours when you happen to be coming across a small ball team, but legit guard fours. And Hayward can do that at least. And this is one of the reasons I think the Heat will miss Jay Crowder, because they don't have another player like that. Harkless can guard fours. He's not quite as beefy as Jay Crowder, but his 3-point shooting is way lower volume, way less reliable. And so you can kind of talk, like he'll mentor, he'll like make sure LaMelo Ball doesn't have too much on his plate right away, blah, blah. Like, I don't love it. This is clearly a team that is just 8th seed or bust all the time. Like, there's just no patience for long-term pain there. And when you're in that market, I get it. I think the sign and trade thing is the most interesting part. Because I thought all along that Indiana has just too many contracts between $6 million and $20 million for there not to be a deal here that makes sense for both sides. If the Pacers really want Gordon Hayward, for all the reasons I just said, a wing who can do those things, they already have a guy like that in TJ Warren, but he's not a playmaker the way Gordon Hayward is a playmaker. So I just thought in the end, after a long game of chicken, there would be a common ground found. And I think really talking to people and reading the tea leaves as best I could, I think it just comes down to the Celtics didn't want Miles Turner. And I think that's really interesting. Miles Turner has $18 million due in each of the next 3 seasons. So he has 3 years and $54 million left on his contract. I just don't think they really wanted Miles Turner. And I did hear from some teams around the league that the Celtics have done some preliminary research on what Miles Turner's trade value would have been to them had they acquired him either in this deal or in a separate deal. And obviously didn't like what they saw, which is really interesting to me because, like, the league has almost done a 180 on Miles Turner. Like, not long ago, that contract was considered like a pretty good contract. He's a shot blocking center who can shoot threes at a decent rate. And now it's like, well, 18 over 3 years, like, I just would rather not have it. And they made a pretty conscious choice, I think, if this reporting is accurate, if the reporting around the league that Gary Washburn and others put out about Miles Turner being the proposed centerpiece is accurate, and I think it is. They made a conscious choice. I'd rather have Tristan Thompson at 9.5 and then 9.5 than a Miles Turner at 18, 18, 18. I think that's really interesting, and it's not the choice I expected Boston to make.
Yeah, when we talk about the TikTok of that deal, and when you get to the question of Miles Turner, I mean, how long are we talking before that deal started to kind of sour? Think about it. So he got paid, and then what was it, a year after that Sabonis was up, where they had to make a decision about what they were going to pay him? To me, that was what I looked at and said, man, I don't know that you're paying Miles Turner that if you realize that Sabonis is going to be one of the guys or the guy that you ultimately want to build around. And so that's a pretty quick timeline of kind of going from one spectrum to the other in terms of how you feel about what you just did. And you're right. When it comes down to it, honestly, when I saw the reports about the idea of what the Celtics were hoping to get back and saw that Turner was a sticking point, when I saw that, I kind of felt like this was just a conversation they're having. Someone's going to eventually say uncle, and they're going to get a deal done.
I'm still surprised. I'm still surprised.
And I'm primarily kind of surprised by it just because it sounded like Hayward really wanted to go there, and it sounded like Indiana really wanted him. So I figured something will happen. It was a little bit difficult to ultimately think that TJ Warren was going to be one of the guys headed back just because he came off such a great bubble. But even if that were the sticking point, like you said, Gordon Hayward ultimately gives you a little bit more variety in what he does. And when you're, I don't know, the middle-sized markets, the smaller markets are always really interesting to see how far they're going to go to get a guy that they really want to get, because of the fact that they know how difficult it is to convince those guys to come in through free agency. And so I didn't think that would be such a sticking point to the idea where it wouldn't happen, whether it was Turner or Warren or whoever. And so that, and even when Gordon Hayward did make the decision, I think Woj was the first one to it, I said, wow, this is surprising. And it wasn't because Charlotte got him necessarily. It was because, like I said, I figured Boston and Indiana would make something work, one. And two, the money that Hayward was paid. I didn't think it was going to be anywhere near that much. And I think I even said this, the annual number is not even that far off. I mean, $4 million would be a lot in, I think, any of our lives per year. But, when you're talking about going from 34 to maybe 25 a year, I didn't think he was still going to be in the $30 million a year range.
Or similarly, if you're going from Boston offering or Indiana offering 25 or 26 to 30, it's not like that $4 million matters. It's why stretching Nick Batum's contract would be a disaster for them, because that money, it matters. Every little bit matters on your books. But it's not like a chasm. It's not like it's not like at $26 million a year, all of a sudden teams are going to be trading 2 first-round picks to go get Gordon Hayward, and at 30, it's a toxic asset. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Especially depending on where you're at as a team. And I think that's what we're both saying, is that Indiana for years now has been anywhere between like that 4-6 range, 4 or 6 seed in the East. And when you're at that point, as we just saw this past year with the Heat, you figure it out. You do what you have to do to get the guys that you feel like are really going to make a difference for your team, because you really never know what will happen. And so I'm a little bit surprised that they could not work that out, or that they couldn't convince Boston to do that. But it's certainly fascinating. I guess I understand enough of the ramifications for Charlotte and why they would want to do that. But it's just fascinating to really look at.
Well, and look, Charlotte has had again, all of their moves in the last 10 years are 8th seed or bust, right? Like, they turned down 4 first-round picks to draft Frank Kaminsky. They traded the number 9 pick for Batum on an expiring contract, knowing a cap spike was coming and they're going to have to pay him $1 gazillion. People are laughing at them because this is the team that refused to pay Kemba last year, their homegrown star, refused to pay him the max, let alone the super max for which he was eligible, and then pay Gordon Hayward $30 million. I get that. Like, Kemba Walker has institutional value to your team. You love Kemba Walker. You're not willing to pay that dude. But it's not like there's a rush around the NBA to get Kemba Walker via trade right now. It's not like people are looking at that contract, which is for more than what Gordon Hayward is making, and are like, oh, that's a trade asset. It's more like, is his knee all right? Like, what's up with that? Like, I don't know if I'm not maybe we're kind of in stay away mode on that. So, I don't like it for Charlotte. I just don't hate it as vociferously as some other people do, which is fine. Like, maybe I'm just, and there's still rumblings that the teams might try to make this a sign-in trade, and I don't really know how that would work. And there's been some people have just speculated Terry Rozier would make sense, which would be hilarious if Terry Rozier and Kemba Walker, who were traded for each other, basically are now on Boston. Terry Rozier makes $19 million and then $18 million. Like, is that a desirable outcome for Boston compared to Miles Turner? I'm not convinced that it is. But again, they just may think Daniel Tice at 5 and Tristan Thompson at 9.5 is like, it's not worth it for us to go get Miles Turner. I don't know, but another contract at 18 in the form of Terry Rozier is not a great outcome either. Bottom line is, Celtics are worse, Raptors are worse, and among the big winners just out of that in the Eastern Conference to me is Miami, because I think Miami pretty much held steady, and Milwaukee, who had a what is the right way to describe this? An unconventional offseason?
Yeah, because you can't really call it. I don't know that you can call it bad. You might be able to. And if you end up calling it bad, from my perspective, it's because it was weird looking at a time where you really need to be doing everything right to convince Giannis to stay.
I was talking to a front office guy last night. I said, do you think the Bucks are better than they were last year? And he said, this is on another team. He said, well, the Bogdanovich thing really was a disaster for them. Could have been. I said, just pretend that never happened.
Right.
Is the team better than they were last year? And my answer was, I actually think they're a little bit better for the playoffs. Regular season is regular season. We all know that they're going to stomp everybody and win a gazillion games. Like, I don't even care anymore. They're the James Harden of
They
teams.
have to prove themselves.
I don't care. I don't care that you scored 50 points against the Hornets and taunted everyone with your step back three. I don't care. Don't go 2 of 11 in game 4 of a 2-1 playoff series, okay? So the Bucks are that for teams, which is ironic given that Giannis and Harden have had a somewhat chippy back and forth in the media. I think they're better only for this reason. Last year going into the playoffs, when you asked yourself to describe what is Milwaukee's best crunch time closing lineup, everything on the line, fourth quarter, 6 minutes to go, what 5 guys are on the floor? My answer personally was Giannis, Middleton, question mark. Maybe that was harsh on Brook Lopez. Brook Lopez shot like 30% from 3 last year, and Giannis at center lineups are really, really good. Now I think it's at least Middleton, Giannis, Holiday, question mark. And Holiday fits that lineup really well as another shot creator and another great defender, another switchable defender if they ever decide to embrace switching in any kind of organized way. So I think the Bucks, despite appearances, now Bogdanovich would have been incredible for them, are better. Yes. I don't like the Augustine deal. Bobby Portis is whatever. Bud will at least say to Bobby Portis, hey, Bobby, the ISO in the post, you're done. You're not doing that again. You take one face-up, jab step, wannabe Carmelo Anthony bullshit 18-footer, you're out of the game. All you're doing is shooting threes. That's it. On offense, you are shooting threes, and on defense, you have to try really hard, and that's it. Bryn Forbes, fine. Can't play in the fourth quarter of a good. He can play in the fourth quarter of the first round. Can't play in the fourth quarter of the conference finals. DJ Augustine, if he's on the floor in the fourth quarter of the conference finals, your defense is going to be in trouble. Portis, maybe ditto. We'll see how he fits with Giannis. Connaughton, fine. Had to bring him back. Torrey Craig, fine. Like, is he part of that closing 5? Probably not. But at least they had one additional answer to it. So appearances aside, I do think the Bucks are qualitatively a little bit better in a way that And it might be that little bit that is inflated in importance when you get to the last 2 rounds of the playoffs. By the way, I'm talking about the conference finals. They didn't even get to the conference finals this year. They have to get back to the conference finals. That's my Buck spiel.
Yeah, I mean that's more or less where I'm at. I think I was actually a little bit more optimistic about some of the guys they brought in. Some of them were just kind of whatever, like the Portis signing. I was kind of like, why'd they do that? But
cheap money for a guy who's going to shoot a lot of threes, and I think he should shoot 35, 36, 30. He'll I think offensively be all right for them.
So what I look at with them is that, and even this would have been somewhat true of Bogdanovich as well. Outside of Drew, who anybody who's followed my work and even listened to me on your podcast before knows that Drew is probably one of my 3 or 4 favorite players in the league, just as far as like, he's not really hurting you in too many facets of the game. He's just such a plus in so many facets. Even shooting where he's not great, he's not really hurting you, more or less. Whereas Bledsoe was hurting you. Bledsoe was just such a struggle to watch the last 2 postseasons. I ran the numbers on it. And I think he shot, what was it? I think he shot 22% on jumpers in the 2 rounds they lost between that Heat series and the Raptors series the last 2 years. And it's just brutal. He doesn't want to come.
That's one of the reasons why there were all those question marks, because you couldn't know that your starting point guard that you're paying $17 million a year for could be on the floor in those moments.
Right. And just that, and it was just such a self-doubt that he had. And there was one clip I remember that he backed the ball out in this last round, I think against Miami. He backed the ball out, like he had the ball at the 3-point line and did that thing where he backs all the way up to half court to get a running start, and then he launches a 3 and he misses everything by like 4 feet. And you can't have that. I mean, it goes without saying you can't have that. But Drew gives you some steadiness. You don't really lose anything defensively. Maybe even an upgrade because Drew is a little bit bigger. He's better. So I mean that alone was really nice. Bogdanovich is a player who, the scoring ability, you would love to have that, because you would at that point you would then have 4 players on offense who it's like, okay, at least 3 who can, if they need to, can get you a basket. Middleton, we just watched the guy drop 40 or whatever it was in the playoff game earlier this postseason. He's obviously a really great second or third option when you consider that you've got Drew there. Bogdanovich is playing on a team where he has to go do a lot of stuff himself. He's not much for defense, and that's fine. That you trusted the Bucks would cover that up.
But he's also not bad. Like, he's fine. He competes. He's going to be in the right place. He's tough. Like, he's not someone that I feel like he's going to be picked on every single possession all the time.
Okay. Yeah. And so the idea if that would have been your top 4, I think we were all kind of blown out of the water just thinking about that. And so like you said, you have to, and it's funny because I don't feel like you can have a rational conversation with the NBA diehards this past week without them bringing that up. But if you take that out of the equation and you just say, like you asked, just analyze what they actually did and forget about that, because I think it was embarrassing for them. But they recovered pretty well, all things considered, in my opinion.
They're better. They're not 3 picks and 2 swaps better, but it doesn't matter if the big guy signs. It doesn't matter.
And that's the thing. And it'll be really fascinating to see whether he does. If it, at this point, I guess you're just kind of hoping that he does, because I'm not really sure that – I don't know that there was really much of anything you could have done this offseason that would have convinced him definitively, or if it's just something that if it's just going to be a day-by-day sort of feel up until we get to that deadline in late December. But I certainly don't think they did poorly. I think most of the guys they got in a class like this, you could kind of understand why most of the guys they got were kind of more one-way guys. They really help you on one end or the other. Drew was the one exception to that for sure. But I don't mind what they did this offseason. And I mean, getting Drew is definitely not a bad thing. The picks, you're not going to be as concerned about if you bring Giannis back.
Well, Bogdanovich would have been a great fit because the Bucks need as many guys as possible who can run a pick and roll with Giannis as the screener, and you can't go under the screen, and the guy running it can defend well enough to be on the floor. And Bogdanovich fits that to a T. He's actually quite a crafty pick and roll player. He has a nice little step back jumper, a floater with both hands. And again, this is a team that needs a guy who can pull up another guy in addition to Middleton who in crunch time can get you a long two if that's the only look available. And again, like DJ Augustine can run a nice pick and roll with Giannis. Like you can't go under that, but DJ Augustine's 5'11" and he's going to get destroyed in the conference finals by whoever they're playing. And with DiVincenzo, if the shot takes another leap forward, he's one of the question marks. He fills in one of the blanks. If Connaughton's shot takes a leap forward, which you've been waiting on for a couple of years, maybe he fills in one of the blanks. So it's possible there. Give me a team. Give me another team, sneaky or not sneaky, I don't care. Give me a team we haven't talked about whose offseason you enjoyed.
Well, I could tell you one I enjoyed, but it's not going to be the one that I say. You asked me to come in and say the two teams that you liked or you thought did well. There was a team I enjoyed. Maybe I'll save it for later. Portland is the team I have right at the top of my list. Portland is a team where every year when we have these conversations, you and me have these conversations, I didn't really like what they did. And then they end up beating, the win projections by 6 or 7 wins. This is the opposite for me, where, first of all, before free agency even started, Robert Covington is a great addition to this team. I think that this is a team that has needed, really, in my opinion, since they lost Wes Matthews, has needed another wing player who could step up, who's just reliable, Covington is probably kind of overrated from the standpoint of the way we view him as a shooter. He can hit threes. He shoots from a little bit further out, but has never really been high above average from three. But his versatility is just something that the team didn't really have in other than maybe fits and starts over the last couple of years. And so theoretically gives them the possibility of playing different sorts of lineups, where you can play small and kind of have them cover for the back line for you. So I really like that. But the other guy I really like that they picked up, aside from the fact that they lost Whiteside, which I don't even think he has a team yet.
Well, I was going to say, they probably lost Whiteside. He hasn't signed anywhere yet.
And if he's not back with Portland, I don't know that Portland.
He's not going to be back with Portland now that they have Cantor. But yeah.
Exactly. So my point exactly, like losing Whiteside, who, if you're someone that looks at stats only, you probably are saying, why haven't they brought that guy back? But if you watch him, you kind of understand a little bit better maybe why not. And
he's a can of Pringles. He's just empty calories. You're going to eat the whole thing. It's going to do nothing for you, nothing but bad for you. He's a can of Pringles.
That sounds like a quarantine sort of food. I think a lot of people have probably done stuff like that. But, it's one of those things where this team now has some versatility with Covington. I love getting Harry Giles. I love that move for them. Someone that, is still really young, has not really completely put it together, but also has length, and is also somebody that, with this team, that is kind of at a point now where you figure if things go right, they're going to be in the playoffs most years. They're not getting opportunities to really go out and basically take a chance on guys like these. And, you hope somebody works out. Maybe he works out for them. I had such high hopes for him with Sacramento and love that pick in Sacramento. So I like that move for them. But also just the idea of, you bring back Rodney Hood at what I consider to be a somewhat reasonable number. And you get Derek Jones Jr., who I think is a little bit older, but it's kind of in that same mold, just like a long guy that is athletic. I just like their offseason. I don't know that it puts them over the top in any sort of way. I think that's probably dictated by other things and staying healthy. But Nurkic will be back now for a full season.
By the way, Nurk was outstanding in the bubble, considering how much time he had off.
Crazy good. And so that's what I'm saying is that having him back healthy, having Whiteside out of the picture completely, and having guys that when you decide that, and frankly Collins too, who was also hurt. I just think this team now has kind of more versatility and can play different lineups than what it was playing last year, where you had to play Whiteside even when you really didn't want to. And I think that could end up being a massive, massive difference for them. And it makes me look forward to watching them more than I did last year.
Portland killed the offseason. Absolutely killed it. If we are going to drool ourselves writing Daryl Morey's premature eulogy, since he already has another job, saying, well, thank God for GMs like Daryl Morey, who go all in when they have a superstar in his prime, throw caution to the wind, they're not afraid to go for it. Well, dealing 2 first-round picks for Robert Covington is a similar kind of move. The Blazers have a superstar in his prime, in Damian Lillard. You may not think he's as good as James Harden, in the playoffs. I think he's probably hit more big shots than James Harden. But
Wow.
he's really, really well. The guy has 2 walk-off shots. I mean, there's it's him and Michael Jordan that have 2 walk-off shots.
No, it's absolutely true. Now that you think about it, yeah, it's absolutely true. Never mind.
Covington is perfect for them. I have said many times that I think he is overrated, and he is. But on this team, all they're going to need him to do is shoot threes, play good team defense. He's not going to take the Blazers from horrible 30th in defense to 8th or something. But if they can be 12th, okay, and I think Collins coming back will help them. Whenever that happens, they'll play him some at the 4. He might end up being their starting 4 with Covington as their starting 3. And they'll play him some at the 5, and I think he's going to be a good stretch 5 or a decent stretch 5. Hood is a nice sort of insurance rotation wing, like a 4th wing or a 3rd wing or something like that. Probably a 4th wing for them. Jones is sort of a break in case of emergency, jack of all trades. Can't shoot. That's fine. He does a lot of other good stuff. I just love their offseason. They can start Covington at the 4 or play Covington at the 4 with Gary Trent at the 3. They can play Covington at the 3, as I just mentioned. I think they had a great offseason. And by the way, between Anthony Simons and Asir Little and future picks, which are still semi-tradable, and Zach Collins, they're not out of stuff for another move if their team proves good enough to justify it. And I saw Bobby Marks on TV last night working the John King of Bristol, okay, working the board, telestrating the board. That, by the way, that terrifies me. There's like a 100% chance if they ever put me in charge of a board for it would crash immediately. I'd be on the wrong team. I'd be circling the wrong guy. I'd be circling off. It would just go horribly. I would panic. I would be a complete choke artist with the board. Totally. Actually, they should let me do it just for how bad it would be. It would be good television. He was working the board, and he said, I think the Blazers are going to be the number 2 seed in the West. And he
said that?
And he got made fun of for it. And let me tell you this, Bobby Marks. I think it's a little aggressive. I think Lakers Clippers are going to go 1-2. But I don't think it's crazy. I think the Blazers have a chance to be the 3rd seed in the West. And if you have a chance to be the 3rd seed in the West, it's not insane to suggest you can finish 2nd in the West. So I look at the West like this, okay? Lakers Clippers, that's probably 1-2 for me. I think the distaste from how the Clippers ended the season, and holy crap, was it humiliating. I mean, I'm humiliated on their behalf. It was so humiliating. They're still really freaking good. Okay, you can leave that. That's fresh in your brain. They're still really good. Denver took a step back, losing Jeremy Grant. Now that contract is insane. The mechanics the Detroit Pistons went through to be able to offer that contract are even more insane. Paying Mason Plumlee $8 million a year is insane, certifiable. But Denver took a step back. Maybe a small step in the regular season. Might be just a tiny step. Utah, I think Utah will be good. Am I ready to put Utah as a juggernaut after their scatter shot last season? Not really. Dallas, I thought had a sneaky okay offseason. Do we know when Kristaps Porzingis is coming back? Not sure we do. Houston, who the hell knows? I mean, really, who the hell knows? I actually think Houston has done pretty well so far. As crazy as it sounds, I love the Christian Wood move for them. I have no idea why the Pistons would go through all the machinations they went through to do everything but keep Christian Wood, who is the only one among all these players we're talking about that has a chance to actually be good in now and maybe all-star good. All-star in the East. It's like JV all-star good. So Houston, who knows? Phoenix, we can talk about. Golden State, we should talk about. I just don't think it's crazy that Portland could be in the conference finals next year. I don't think I would pick them to do it, but I think that's completely reasonable. I think they had a great offseason.
Particularly for all that, we talked about a little bit earlier too, as we were discussing the Lakers. This is kind of a year. If you're going to go for it, you do it now while Golden State is kind of, I won't say in disarray because an injury isn't something that, that they did to themselves. It's something that was unfortunate, but between that, like we said, the Rockets, who knows what they're going to do? Who knows whether Harden will even be there? the whole season. And the Clippers, do it now while you can. The Clippers, think about if they have an injury or something like that, it's kind of there for the taking.
Damian Lillard's 30. If you're not going to go for it now, what are you even doing? Like, what? Why are you even in the business? If you're not I love what Portland did. Let's talk about the Warriors, because I think Phoenix had a great offseason, okay? And I think Phoenix is going to make the playoffs next year. I think their playoff drought will end. That said, you start listing teams in the West, you're like, my God. Lakers, Clippers, that's 2. I'm just naming teams, not in order. Portland 3, Dallas 4, Denver 5, Utah 6, Houston 7, Warriors 8. That's 8. We haven't even got to Phoenix yet. Phoenix 9. Again, this is not in order. I'm just listing teams that are reasonable. New Orleans, to me, is the biggest wild card in the Western Conference. You could tell me New Orleans won 50 games. You could tell me New Orleans goes, I guess the equivalent of 50 games in a 72-game season. You could tell me New Orleans finishes 10 games under 500. I'd be like, sure, whatever. I don't know. And then I think another step down to Sac, Spurs, Grizzlies. Apologies to the Grizzlies. I think they're going to take a little bit of a step back. Wolves, Thunder, way down. It's just going to be hard for the playoffs are going to be hard to make. So tell me what you think of the Warriors. Let's review. Klay Thompson, I did my ode to Klay Thompson last week. It sucks. It's horrible. He's gone. They get Kelly Oubre. They draft James Wiseman. And they sign, I thought, sneaky little good move, signing Kent Bazemore at the minimum. Wiggins is still on the Warriors. Need to refresh your memory on that. Some people do.
Yeah.
I don't know what their starting lineup is going to be. It could be Curry, Oubre, Wiggins, Green, Wiseman, which is Curry and 4 so-so to bad to non-shooters in Wiseman's case. I would be curious to see how that lineup would work, because it's going to fly. That's the one thing it's going to do. They're going to run like all hell.
Fast. My God, they're going to be fast.
And it's going to be dynamic.
And athletic.
Wiseman, if he starts, I don't know if he will, but if he starts, is going to be dynamic. How good do you think that team is going to be?
I don't know. And I don't think, it's interesting because last year, I think a lot of the smartest folks in the game were curious to see how the D'Angelo Russell thing was going to play. And to some extent, obviously he and Kelly Oubre have very, very different games, but Oubre is an interesting case too, where just someone who at peak Warriors would fit that team really, really well. Maybe not necessarily as a great, great shooter, but someone that just cuts a whole lot, that runs the floor, that plays with a ton of energy. And I would imagine some of those things are still there, but it's just that team without spacing. Obviously, they'll get Steph spacing and everything, but in terms of without having other guys there as threats, without having Klay, is probably the best way to put it at this point. I don't know what that looks like. And on top of that, I'm not really sure what it looks like when all these guys they're like, aside from Draymond, obviously, or maybe average defenders, maybe, and maybe not that.
It's a great point. I'm focusing on the offense. You're right. We'll see if Wiseman actually opens as a starter. I mean, they've toyed with Pascal as a starter before. They've toyed with Chris as a starter, but it doesn't really change the equation where Oubre is okay, should be better than he is. He's okay. Wiggins is the same. Okay, should be better than he is. You're right. I'm focusing on the spacing. The other end is a question mark too.
Yes, I just really don't know. But I mean, the fan in me, just the basketball fan in me, similar to last year, really looks forward to being able to see Steph in a situation where he kind of has to do a lot of it himself. He's capable. He's got enough offensive talent to score when he's dishing the ball to these guys, maybe whether or not they're shooting threes or not. I just have too many questions about the defensive side of the ball without Klay there. And, I mean, obviously the offensive side of the ball without Klay there. But I don't know what to expect. If you told me that they were going to win 30 games, I could buy that. Ooh. If you told me that Steph is going to struggle with injuries, they're going to win fewer than that. But if you told me that they're going to win closer to 40 or 45, I could buy that too, because there's enough talent on the roster. But even the talent that they have is kind of like checkered a little bit, just as far as, like you said, they should be a little bit better than they are. But who knows? You could really tell me anything about that team, and I feel like there's much of a question mark as anybody in the West.
It's a big year for Steph Curry because, we have seen him as recently as the 2019 finals through the singular power of his shooting gravity take a team that was, even when Clay was still healthy in those finals and even after, very, very limited offensively, and was just through his sheer, the threat that he presents with the ball, was drawing 2.5 defenders 30 feet from the hoop and creating layups for Kevon Looney, who cannot jump at all, and creating 4-on-3s for Draymond to Kevon Looney to Andre Iguodala, just zero shooting anywhere. And he was good enough to keep him in it, a very limited team. Last year, he played 4 games before he broke his hand. They were getting absolutely destroyed in those games. They were 1-3, and all 3 losses were such bad blowouts that you were like, no, I picked them to miss the playoffs last year, and a lot of people thought I was nuts, and I was like, I didn't think they were going to be like this. I mean, this is awful. Now, they were starting D'Angelo Russell, Steph, Glenn Robinson III, Draymond Green, and a pick'em at center. They started Looney, Pascal, and Chris each in those first 4 games. This lineup makes a lot more sense and should be a lot better than that lineup.
Yes.
But those first 4 games, they seem like ages ago. They were like, oh my God, like eye-popping how bad they were. And so I think, the whole Steph LeBron thing, the archetype of those players, I think there was a thought when the Warriors were humming and he was a unanimous MVP that, yeah, Steph's at that tier. There were some people I never got here. I never got there completely, but there were some people who argued he was the best player in the NBA. Sure. I never got there.
Yeah, I don't know that I ever did too, and it was probably more rooted in kind of all-around game, meaning the defensive side of it too. But it's never, I don't know. I struggle with the idea that it would be crazy to have ever thought that.
No,
because he was by far the best shooter in the world in a league where shooting is is probably the most valued thing for right now. But so I understand it.
I think what I remember saying at one point was the gap between Steph and LeBron is not as big as people think it is. Something of that nature. He can't physically dominate the way LeBron does. He has to dominate in other ways, and we will see how that translates to a team that is a little bit strange and a little bit lighter on shooting than his past teams, and certainly not as star-studded as the ones with Kevin Durant, which were they weren't even teams anymore. They were just something else.
Right.
I do think on paper, this is still a playoff team. But nothing is given to anybody in the West if Houston hangs on to Harden. Less so Westbrook, but Harden. Because James Harden, look, it's a circus over there. Okay, they're not deep. I like the Sterling Brown. I don't get why Sterling Brown gets the minimum and Tristan Thompson gets $9 million a year and Mason Plumlee gets $8 million a year and on with these centers. Like, we just have gone through this, like, nobody needs centers. Centers this. Like, Sterling Brown, look, he didn't play much last year. He's a 35% shooter from 3. He's big. He can guard 3 positions. Like, why is he available for the minimum? Great signing for Houston. Christian Wood has a chance to be really interesting playing with Harden. And James Harden, fault his playoff performances, nitpick them. It's all fair. I've done it. In the regular season, that dude is a walking playoff berth. He's a top 3 MVP candidate. It's hard to miss the playoffs with James Harden playing a full season for your team.
35 a game for 3 years in a row, basically, which it's nuts to think about it. I wrote a piece, I think we probably all did, really, right after D'Antoni decides he's going to leave that job. And I basically said in my piece, everything should be on the table for the Rockets. Kind of thinking in the back of my mind, Morey may decide it's time to go, which obviously he did. D'Antoni had decided it was time to go. And at that point, you're the Rockets, and you kind of reached as close to maybe the mountaintop as you're going to get, unless you really overhaul the crap out of things now, which becomes difficult to do because of Russ. And so the idea that the Rockets obviously needed to consider trading Harden too, depending on what his appetite for kind of going through this is, but also depending on the idea of what would you get back for somebody that gives you 35 a night every night, and goes on, 20-point streaks of 30 points a game. I'm still kind of fascinated just by the potential of what they would get back in a trade for him with this much time left on his deal. And quite frankly, how much of a box does it put them in, if at all, given that he's kind of given them a directive of exactly where he'd like to be. If you don't want the assets that team has, what is the appetite to trade him elsewhere or to trade for him elsewhere if you're concerned that maybe he doesn't want to play there compared to Brooklyn?
It's going to be fascinating to see how that all plays out. But as long as they have him, it can be a circus. You could have the big top up. You can have the lion tamer in the bowels of the arena. They're making the playoffs if they have James Harden. It's hard for me to imagine they're not making the playoffs. Unless he just pouts, which we have seen guys do.
That's the first thing I thought.
Unless he's just like, I just don't really want to play, or I'm going to be stationary even by my standards on defense. I might sit on the floor a couple of times and just, relax. I guess that's a thing. Phoenix, according to Woj, just re-signed Dario Saric, which was a no-brainer for them. He had no market left. He was always going to go back there. I love the Crowder acquisition for Phoenix. He's, again, exactly what we talked about. Cam Johnson starting 4 worked great in the bubble. Maybe he starts again, but I like a guy who has a little bit more of a track record guarding up a position, and Crowder can do that, and they have plenty of shooting with Paul, Booker, and Ayton even is a good shooter around him. Phoenix, I would like one more trustworthy rotation piece for them, but I think on paper their team makes a lot of sense, and they're going to be. I think I'm going to pick them to make the playoffs. I love it. Let's go Suns. Give me one team that you thought had a bad offseason, and you can't say the Pistons because everyone's been making fun of the Pistons for 3 days.
Yeah, on the Pistons too. I'll get to the bad team in a second. The Pistons. Did I love their offseason? No. And I think it was kind of easy. I know I made a joke about them at one point over the course of the first night of free agency. I also understand some of it. Like the Grant thing was obviously an overpay. You're banking on the fact that he's going to do something more now in a bigger role, which was.
I don't understand that one.
I don't think I see exactly how he can give you that much value. I mean, he was a guy that a quarter of his shots, a quarter of his baskets from 2-point range were unassisted. And so you're now asking that sort of player, and 1% of his 3-pointers were unassisted last year.
Yeah,
so
I don't know what the plan is. Like Jeremy Grant turned down the same money from Denver. Okay.
That's what was interesting to me.
Which is true. That reporting is accurate. Because he wanted a bigger role in Detroit. Like, dude, man, I love Jeremy Grant. He was one of my 6 most intriguing players going into last season. I thought he was great for them in the playoffs. Like, you had to work real hard, and credit to you did it, to become a really good role player in the NBA. The jump from that to dude who runs like 25 pick and rolls a game with Blake Griffin at the 4 and a true center and not a lot of spacing on the floor, that's a bit like all that work you just did to become a really valuable role player in the NBA. It's 5 times worse to become what you think you can become. More power to him. If he can do it, that's great. I see no prayer of that.
It'll just be really interesting, too, because the more I thought about it, some of the dynamic there, I mean, he's not going to be the 4th option there. I'm sure with the money they're paying him, he's going to be the 2nd option. But it's also a dynamic where like he's on a team with another playmaking power forward or like a playmaking big.
For now.
Basically.
For now.
So for now. And we don't know what will happen with Blake. But, I didn't mind. Like, they also got DeLon Wright. And I'm like, okay,
Like the DeLon Wright. I like the DeLon Wright get.
Exactly.
I like that.
And so it's not everything they did was bad. And so I think that I understand where the criticism is coming from. But
and they got
a while.
They got a bunch of picks, which is what they should be in the business. Now they gave up 4 second-round picks in the bizarro Luke Kennard for number 19 for Landry Shamet 3-way. I have a suspicion why they gave up those 4 second-round picks, but I haven't nailed it down yet. That was a little strange. I actually think the Pistons could be this year's Suns on a smaller scale, where everything they did was completely nonsensical and didn't really, and not everything, but a lot of what they did just didn't make a lot of sense. And yet you could come out of it being better than people think or looking better than people think. I think that could be, they could be this year's Suns. Remember, last year's Suns had this chaotic, crazy offseason where like they had to get off Josh Jackson, and they misread their cap space and this and that, and it worked out fine. Like, they gave away TJ Warren for nothing, and it worked out okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of want to see what happens with that. I get some of the criticism. I think some of it's a little bit overblown. The team that I have listed as my worst one, or the bad team that I have listed, was actually Cleveland. The reason I have Cleveland there, last night I look up and I say, did they get even like a single guy that they signed in free agency? Which, on the one hand, is Cleveland young? Are they kind of trusting their guys to grow into certain roles? Sure. But Cleveland's also had the worst defense in the NBA 2 years running, including a year ago, the worst defense in NBA history, efficiency-wise. You don't bring in anybody to really help fix that. Now, granted, draft-wise, they did address some of it. They went out and used their first pick on someone to do that. But you could also bring in a vet. I mean, you're still kind of a bigger team than you probably need to be. We've all been wondering whether Kevin Love is going to get traded for 2 years now. You've got more bigs than you need. And, when I look at somebody like a Chris Dunn signing go in Atlanta, which I think probably a good pickup for Atlanta, that's the kind of player that you could bring in that, maybe they don't want to be better than they are, but not an expensive signing. Somebody that would immediately think about what he did for the Bulls statistically from a defensive standpoint, and, just with what he's able to do on the wing. When the Bulls took him off the court, they're not Cleveland bad defensively, but they weren't good. And I mean, just one or two players like that, just on the defensive end, would help you enormously. And to see that they just didn't spend anything really, I didn't quite understand that. I mean, they're young, but they're not so young to the point where, that it's all about developing these guys. You've got other things that you could be doing to make the team a little bit better.
I don't have a strong quibble. They didn't have any cap flexibility. They had the mid-level. That's about it. I think they're going to sink or swim with those two guards and Kevin Porter and Dylan Windler and Okoro and all that. I mean, they're kind of, they did get a second round pick from the Lakers for taking JaVale last night.
They did.
I mean, I think they're kind of TBD. They've got a couple trades to make during the season. We'll see how they do. But Dan Gilbert's not going to be patient forever. Like, they need to start. The young players need to, and they did start showing some progress last year, but they need to start showing some progress in ways that translate to winning. I'm trying to think.
Defense does that. Defense would do that. I just don't see how you can kind of rest your laurels on the idea of just being the worst team in the NBA defensively. You put too much pressure on your offense to have to go out and score too much every night.
Yeah, and beyond that, like, we should probably talk about the Hawks a little bit, but I want to see what the Bogdanovich situation ends up being first.
So the Hawks, to me, are, it's funny because when you just said that they're not going to wait around, Dan Gilbert's not going to wait around forever. The Hawks are the obvious, counter to that, is that they really were going for it right now. I'd love to know what you thought. If I was a fan of the Hawks, I would be so jazzed up about what they just did. As an analyst, I think I'm a lot more reserved than that. I don't necessarily love all these moves that they just made. And I also wonder if it's maybe a little bit too much too fast. But I would love to kind of hear what you think of it.
Well, the Gallo one to me, Gallo's a really good offensive player. He looked horrible in the playoffs defensively and really offensively too. They need shooting off the ball. He provides that. I don't love that signing for $20 million a year. Bogdanovich I get because he's a little bit younger, although he's 28, I think. And he does
he's
not
a lot older than I realized until I looked it up the other day.
It happens with the Euro guys. They come over late and you think they're rookies and whatever.
Right.
And he doesn't have Gallo's history of injuries, which scares me a little bit. And I do love the idea of a wing ball handler who can get Trae Young off the ball a little bit. And like Herder has dabbled in that. Reddish and Hunter really aren't ready to play that role yet on any kind of volume. And because I like the idea of get Trae Young, because Trae Young running 70 pick and rolls a game is not going to be fun enough for his teammates. Everyone wants to touch the ball in the NBA, okay? And if you're going to be that, you have to be Luka level transcendent at it, and you can't be the worst defensive player in the NBA because that's going to make your teammates cranky. So a guy like Bogdanovich who can get him moving a little bit off the ball, I really like. The Gallo one, it's just they're going to be crowded, man. They're going to have a lot of dudes. Like they already have Hunter, Reddish, and Herder on the wing. Like Bogdan is going to infringe on those minutes. Like, are they going to start Bogdanovic and Gallinari at the 2 and the 3 if they end up with both of them? And so all their young dudes are coming off the bench now. Like that seems a little extreme to me because you would think Collins, if he's on the team, is still going to start at 4. Capella, you just gave up stuff for. He's going to start. It's just a little. It feels like one too many moves in a conference where like the 8th seed is not like drastically out of reach anyway. Like if you just got Bogdanovic, I think they have a shot at it. But obviously, Bogdanovic is restricted. You don't have a guarantee. You don't know if you're going to get him. The Kings might match.
You know what it reminds me of just a little bit. And you and I talked about this maybe more than a year ago. I was on your podcast. We talked about it. The Kings were a little bit like this a couple years ago, where they kind of doubled up on a bunch of young players that they already had that probably feel like they have some stake to a claim with regards to certain spots in the rotation. And then you bring in a bunch of veterans. It was that year that the Kings brought in, who was it? Zach Randolph and
George Hill.
Vince Carter.
George Hill.
And George Hill. And it kind of created this clash a little bit with some of the younger guys because it's like the older guys want to play and win right now. The younger guys are growing into that role. And so maybe, even though I just criticized the Cavs a little bit, maybe that's kind of the concern is that when I say too much too fast, that's probably some of what that is who gets the minutes, who gets to start, who gets the shots. But my bigger question, and I think this is always kind of my focus and what I look for with teams is how well are you defending? The Hawks have just been horrendous defensively for a while to the point where, as you said, it puts a lot of pressure on Trey. It puts a lot of pressure on this defense. They have not had a lot of rim protection, but now they have Capella. So you're thinking, yes, we finally have something there. And now you bring in a bunch of guys that, even at their best sometimes are really just not that great defensively. Chris Dunn, they did bring him in. So I'm curious to see some of it, but he doesn't really fit the rest of the team from a shooting standpoint. We'll see.
And by the way, if you're gonna play Chris Dunn some at the 2, that's more wing minutes that are not going to your young trio of wings. They're interesting. They're interesting.
Like I said, I would be thrilled just from the standpoint of they're spending, they're trying to do something, they're trying to make something happen now. But fans don't necessarily think in the most logical, rational team building sort of way, the sort of long view that you need your front office to have, which who knows? Maybe, ownership there may not have the appetite to really sit and wait for much longer. Who knows?
Well, we're not done yet. There will always be moves to make. So we should revisit this when all the dust is settled. And when that dust settles, new dust will become unsettled. That's the beauty of the NBA. There's always going to be someone who wants to be traded. There's always going to be drama. There's always going to be stuff going on. But it has been a wild week, and the landscape does look a little bit different than it was when it started. And we will sort of have to see how all that evolves. A couple more dominoes yet to fall, but boy, oh boy! And by the way, training camp starts in a week.
Oh God! I think we're
8 days from training camp. It's kind of crazy. It's actually settled in on a lot of team employees. Like in the last 4 or 5 days, like. I've had a lot of conversations where they're all like, this is kind of insane that we're trying to do this. Like, we're still, and by the way, we're still all working out like the fans thing and the virus protocols for who's going to travel, who's going to be allowed in the arena, where's the media going to be. There's like a million virus related things that we're also trying to do because the plague is here. And we don't want a lot of people getting the plague at our arenas. And what's going to happen if like a team gets it's just like crazy. All right, but that's for another day. Chris Herring, you can read all his stuff at 538. Your NBA coverage is second to none. When is your book done? What's the update on the 90s Knicks book?
It's part of the reason I'm so kind of frustrated that the season is starting so quickly. My book, my 90s Knicks book will be done. My deadline for it, no matter what, is the end of January. And so I'll turn that in January, and depending on what they decide with regards to when my book is coming out versus a Scottie Pippen memoir that the same publisher is dropping, it'll either come out this time next year or at the very beginning of 2022, which seems forever away. But hoping for a year from now. I got to turn it in 2 months, no matter what. So
I can't wait to read it. It's going to be awesome.
Appreciate you.
And we will promote the hell out of it on this podcast. Chris Herring, thank you very much.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much, Zach, as always.